Hello, everybody. How's it going? Welcome to another episode of Slidin into my DMs. And hello, my DMs.
Hey.
Got Corey with us as usual, Preston, and Mr. Rogers. Thanks for being here, guys.
Of course.
I just want to start off today by telling you watching how much I really appreciate you guys. I just, I'm feeling a little, I don't know, overwhelmed at not only kind of the recent success of the channel and the growth and things, which has been awesome, but just how great the community is. Like, you know, and you guys can attest to this, right? I read through the comments, and sure, we'll get a troll-y kind of gatekeeper once in a while, and that's fine. But for the most part, like, everyone is just so super, like, optimistic, upbeat, positive, supportive, and yeah, you guys are just fantastic.
We heart you.
Yes, very
100%. 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having a community that everybody can just feel safe in and discuss things happily, like it's really nice, and it's great to see that a community based off of optimizing characters can create such a good natured community beyond it.
Well, that's the thing, right? I think people who, you know, liked to sort of, I guess, who are interested in the aspects of the game that I'm interested in. I mean, I'm interested in all aspects of the game, but my passion sort of, I guess, right, is this sort of number crunchy, making powerful characters. And very often, and frankly, I think probably with good reason, like, we tend to get a little bit of a bad rap because sometimes people who think this way or value, you know, this thing above all other aspects of D&D can be a little bit, you're doing it wrong, you know.
Right.
And I just don't see a lot of that in our community. And so anyway, it's awesome. And
Absolutely.
so most of you, probably all of you, I guess, have seen the announcement that I put up earlier today about the collaboration with Treant Monk. I mean, in fact, let's see, Preston and Dallin, you guys were with me when we were at lunch. We were standing in line to order our food, and Treant Monk sort of slid into my DMs.
Your Twitter DMs.
That's our job.
You should have heard the squeal of delight. I
check
mean,
it out.
was,
Treant Monk just messaged me, and anyway, so I'm super excited about that collaboration. If you haven't seen the announcement, just check in my shorts playlist. Oh yeah, there we go. Card.
Go on vacation for 1 week and you forget how to do this.
And I look like you, right? The camera's got me. I look like I'm sunburned or something. I promise I'm not normally this pink. I look like I've got lipstick on.
It's just the camera. It's just
All right.
weird.
Anyway, let's jump in. One last announcement, I guess. We are planning on recording the 10,000 subscribers gauntlet this Saturday.
If you see any gray hairs on my head, they're new.
Whatever, you're the one throwing two for
Beholders? That's your community throwing two beholders at you, my friend.
It's their fault. That's your fault.
Talk about a good-natured community, and they're putting you up against the worst.
So yes, we'll probably all die a miserable death.
Nah.
Corey doesn't have to fudge his numbers too much. So that's assuming, I guess, that we actually hit 10,000 subscribers next week sometime, which it looks like we will. So we're probably going to record it right before we actually hit 10,000 subscribers and then wait. So that would be funny if all of a sudden we didn't get any new subscribers and it's like,
Yep. 9,999.
And we peaked.
Yep.
I'll look for that to hit next week. I'm just gonna I'm gonna edit it and then just wait until we hit 10K and release it, I guess. So anyway,
that's going to be awesome.
yeah, it'll be fun.
Be a lot of fun.
It'll be fun. So okay, let's talk about what we're here to talk about today. We've got a quick ruling, as always. A quick ruling question. I'm afraid this one might not be so quick, but we'll see. And then sort of a larger conversation topic, right? So for the quick ruling, I want to know about familiars taking the help action. This is something that you see a lot, particularly from in forums and character creation places where people are like, oh, here's a great way to sort of optimize, right, this particular awesome spell, Find Familiar. And what a lot of people do is they'll summon their familiar, and then even though the familiar can't take any attacks itself, and I'm just talking about the familiar from the Find Familiar spell, right? Mm-hmm. Even though that familiar can't take any attacks itself, it could take the help action and potentially give you, or somebody else for that matter, advantage, at least on one attack. And I've used this a lot in, several of my builds. Other people have. Sometimes people will kind of make an objection to, how I say it can be used in game. And so I wanted to talk about it with you guys and talk about your interpretation of rules as written, but also how you would rule it at your table, and maybe even a third this time, which is a tweet from Jeremy Crawford that might sort of throw a wrench in the works there.
Oh boy.
Okay, so let me read a couple of things for reference. First up, the important part of the Find Familiar spell that's relevant here. Your familiar, we are told, once we've summoned it, right, acts independently of you, but it always obeys your commands. In combat, it rolls its own initiative and acts on its own turn. A familiar can't attack, but it can take other actions as normal, including, I'm adding this here, including the help action, right? Now let's read about the help action. You can lend your aid to another creature in the completion of a task. When you take the help action, the creature you aid, and you here will substitute for the familiar, right? Mm-hmm. Gains advantage on the next ability check. Alternatively, you can aid a friendly creature in attacking a creature within 5 feet of you. You feint, distract the target, or in some other way team up to make your ally's attack more effective. If your ally attacks the target before your next turn, the first attack roll is made with advantage. So let's go rules as written first. Your interpretation: can I have my familiar and then use it to give me advantage on my next attack? Rules as written.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't see anything wrong with that. In fact, I think it's a perfectly viable strategy.
Okay. Anybody want to disagree with that?
I dare you.
Say rules as written. Again, not what I would rule, but rules as written. If your familiar went before you, or if your DM elects to have your familiar take a turn on your turn, then I say yes. But it gets into some muddy waters with things like, was it Guiding Bolt? Is that the one where you hit a creature and then the next attack on it gets advantage? Right. Is that, am I thinking, remember correctly?
Yes.
It gets into muddy waters for stuff like that where order matters. But I think for me at my table, I'm not that stickler. So I'd say, yeah, that's fine.
Well, if your familiar goes after you, all you're doing is waiting one turn before you get the help action. Because as I read the rule, or had it read to me just now, it doesn't say anything about the next creature that makes the attack or makes an ability check.
Right.
It's a targeted creature. A friendly creature, which is a target, right. A friendly creature gets a advantage on their next attack roll.
Right. Yeah, maybe just to reread that. It says, alternatively, you can aid a friendly creature in attacking a creature within 5 feet of you, right? But Preston, that your point, I think, is a good segue into the Jeremy Crawford tweet. Whoa, you guys moved.
Sorry.
What happened?
Accidental planar discharge.
All right.
I really have a stomachache after that. Gosh.
How chaotic.
Well, you stayed in place, and so did I. It was just,
I feel just fine.
Whatever. Anyway, let me read the Jeremy Crawford's tweet. So somebody, this was 4 years ago, somebody asked, Anomi asked, for the help action, is it the next ally that attacks the target, or can you specify which ally is helped? And I'm adding this as it seems to indicate in the book, right? Mm-hmm. And Jeremy Crawford, Mr. JC himself, replied, if you use the attack aiding option in help, the next ally who attacks the target gets the benefit. And so I think this is
Sorry.
I think this is why I've had some people show up in my comments and be like, I don't think you can do, the help action like you're saying that you can do, because
he's treating it like guidance, and then those other ones.
Yeah. So typically what I recommend, right, is that if you're gonna do this, if you're gonna take a familiar and have them help you, or somebody else for that matter, then you take an owl as your familiar, because owls get the flyby feature. And the cool thing about that is that, right, they can fly in, take the help action, fly away without provoking an opportunity attack, and thereby hopefully stay safer, or they're more likely to stay safe anyway. And then, on your turn, you have advantage on your first attack because you got help from your familiar. But then some people will be like, well, not necessarily. Like, if according to Jeremy Crawford, it's just the next person who gets the attack. So, if you go right after your familiar, then yes, but otherwise it's just whoever attacks that creature next.
The help action, though, does not state that in the rules.
No, it doesn't. But
One
Jeremy
other
Crawford
thing
does.
But he's not the rules, right?
No,
He's just
Jeremy Crawford is not your DM. Your DM is your DM. However,
so
I have one other thing that I want to point out with this, just really quick. As the rules is written, in the new Fey Folk Unearthed Arcana that we talked about a couple weeks ago, the Hobgoblins specifically give you bonuses when using the help action, and they have you target somebody each time, whether the help action is helping or aiding on an attack. It specifically says that they target somebody. Like, what happens if it's the way Jeremy Crawford says? Is it the next person gets this random benefit, or I think that's a little squirrely, and I don't like it.
A potential workaround. Let's assume that we have to do what Jeremy Crawford says. Which I know you don't, but let's just assume for the sake of argument. So one of my listeners has to do it that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how they're
Poor listener.
decided. Okay, a potential kind of half Band-Aid solution, right, is to say, fine, your familiar holds its action, right? It's going to take the help action as a reaction, right? But it's going to hold it until the triggering effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe the trigger is as soon as, you go to attack somebody, then your familiar is going to use its reaction to take the help action and thereby still give you advantage. The problem is, if I'm not mistaken, that when you use your reaction, all you get to do is the action that you're holding. You don't get to move.
Yeah.
Right. And so you couldn't, if you were an owl kind of hovering, waiting to swoop in and help and then swoop away, it doesn't really work, right? Because you're hovering, you're holding your action, which is to take the help action. And then the trigger happens, your wizard or whoever summoned you goes to attack, but you can't help from way up here, right? You have to be within 5 feet of them. So you'd have to move up on your turn. Hold the familiar would have to move up next to the enemy, right? Hold its action for the reaction. Then when you go to make your attack, it triggers, they take the help action, you get advantage, but your familiar is in mortal peril that whole time, right? Because they're sort of hovering next to the enemy. So with all of those potential options said, how would you guys rule this at your table? Let's start with Mr. Rogers.
Okay, well, I would say you just get to tell your familiar to help you on its turn because it gets to obey you or whatever. So on its turn, its action is to help you. And then the next time you attack, you get advantage. Okay. If you already have an advantage for whatever reason, maybe you say, help so-and-so. And now that creature, your familiar, is going to help somebody else.
Right.
As long as it meets, the 5 feet and everything like that.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like you're potentially being even more lenient than rules as written, because in that case, you're not saying, take the help action and thereby distract this enemy. You're saying whoever I'm going to attack or whoever my ally is going to attack, help them. And then you're sort of tying the help to the player, not to the enemy that they're
exactly. Yeah, I think that's, to me, that's how it's intended. And I think the familiar is kind of like a magical extension of the wizard, basically. or whoever's
Yeah, you can cast spells through it.
Exactly. So to me, it's just a magical extension of the caster. So why not be able to take the help action for another ally, just the same way that you could?
Okay.
So
cool. Hey, I'm never going to argue against what I think is maybe more lenient than rules as written. So okay, cool. Preston.
Echoing. Yeah, I feel the same way. The one thing that I think this highlights about D&D in 5e that I don't necessarily like is the idea that, let's say I'm a cleric and my whole cleric's business is 100% healing people, right? And let's say I only have lay on hands, and it comes to and I hold my action to heal someone if they get damaged, but they're out of range and I can't do it. Like the whole idea of not being able to hold your whole turn, that's a whole other discussion. Mm-hmm. But with the familiar in particular, I think if it's smart enough for you to be able to tell it to do something like, hey, go over there, or hey, do this. I think it's smart enough to say, hey, go and, fly around that paladin's head, and anyone that attacks it, once just try and help that next person to attack. Or if I want to say, hey, the next person I attack, you should, swoop in, bat around in its face and do that kind of thing. But that's one of the reasons why, for me, I found it was easier as a DM not only in the initiative order, because everybody wants to get another pet and make the initiative order really long, but just keep them together. I mean, I know rules is written, it says it has its own initiative. You can still treat it as its own, but just roll your own and then have it go at the same time as you. So.
Okay. So you would say the familiar just goes when you go, you tell it who to help, whether it's you or somebody else. Keep it simple. Okay.
Thing to simplify combat, to make it so there's less things being tracked and like, oh, well, you can't do that because I'm all for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think, Corey?
You were right to save me for last because I have words. I don't like the whole asking Jeremy Crawford for rulings thing. This is gonna cause some contention. I've kind of been on this molehill for a while, on this soapbox that I will die on or whatever. But I don't like the idea of him coming in and telling you how to run your game or how you can play your game. Communicate with your DM. Talk with them first and find out what they want to do. Personally, in my game, it's always going to be exactly like Preston said. The familiar acts on your turn. You can have it aid you or aid somebody else. It targets with that aid because that's how aid is written and read to me. Yeah. Or you can have it just do anything. However, I want to add something here, that if you're playing with a strict DM who's got rules as written, it's always, Jeremy Crawford's rule stands, it's always the next person. That is still a very valuable thing for your familiar to do. That doesn't detract from having an owl familiar swoop down and harry somebody at all. Yeah. Like it's still fantastic. And don't shy away from it.
Not only that, but I would add, I think, sometimes people will say things like, well, in that case, like, my DM or at my table, because I'm mean, I'm going to have my monster. That might work once, but then on the next turn, I'm going to have my monster ready its action so that when your owl swoops in, it's going to attack it. And your owl only has 1 hit point. It's going to kill it. And poof goes your familiar.
What a waste of a monster's turn.
Exactly.
To just take away 1 point.
Great. Okay. My one
does 36 damage to the owl. Okay, cool.
So my 1 hit point resummonable owl.
To me.
Just took like 30 damage to the face.
It's a great soak
onto somebody else.
So
it's 10 gold to resummon the owl. That's kind of a bummer, but still.
Yeah. So we just got back to playing live, and this is a great topic to discuss in this case because we did a huge combat at the end of the session where. One of our players, the only one that the people haven't met, actually, that they'll be meeting with the 10K. His skeletons came around because he's playing a necromancer, and they came around. They were flanking the enemy forces, and it forced some of the enemies to turn around and take care of it because obviously nobody wants to be flanked. That's no fun. Yeah, and it was skeletons. Exactly, and it basically took like 2 third-level spell slots and the full action of like one of the big bads in that fight to take out the skeleton forces. And it was kind of I felt a little bit bad as a DM taking care of that, but at the same time I talked to Scott later about it, and he was like, no, they did what they were supposed to do, which is tank the damage.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was glad that I didn't get hit with those fireballs.
Yeah.
Because I had a really high armor class and resistance to attacks from undead, but I would have.
Doesn't
I
your
would have gone down a
armor,
lot
the
sooner.
armor you're wearing, does it give you disadvantage on?
I still went
dex
down
checks or no?
eventually, but I would have gone down a lot sooner.
That fight would have been a lot shorter if you would have had that full thing on you.
Yeah, for
Died
sure.
on a different molehill.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's move on to the next topic. And we're back. Thanks to our sponsors. You guys all moved again. And
Yep.
Plane shift.
Preston got a new background.
It's plane
Planar
shift.
shift, man. Like when you go to commercial and you come back, things are different. Just deal with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes Rhodey's a different actor. You just got to move with it,
Or Quicksilver.
Yeah, or Quicksilver. Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the larger topic that I wanted to discuss today, which is balancing role play and combat in your games. So I have a few questions, a few sort of seeds to plant to maybe get us started on this topic here. Really what I'm kind of trying to the conversation I'm trying to generate here is like, how much is too much of one and or not enough of the other when it comes to combat and role play, right? They're both important aspects to any D&D game, I think. We'd all agree. Mm-hmm. But some people tend to like one aspect of that game more than others. Some people might struggle in one aspect of that game more than others. Some people may come to you as a DM and complain even and say, like we haven't had a fight in like 2 sessions, or we're just constantly fighting. Like, I don't want to just be a murder hobo. Mm-hmm. I want to try and talk my way out of fights, things like that. So I kind of want to talk about that. Like what ideas do you guys have to sort of help find the right balance? What do you think the right balance is for you? But then also, how do you kind of help your players who may be having different opinions about that find common ground? Yeah. What do you guys think? How much is the right amount of combat versus role play?
Oh, that is a hard question though. I think the answer is it kind of depends on your group, the group composition. Obviously, if your entire group is really like dedicated to the combat aspect, you want to lean more heavily in that direction. And if your group really likes getting to know each other and getting to know the characters, then you definitely lean the other direction. And you can kind of tell, even if you don't talk with your players, you can kind of tell which direction they lean by how much they engage with this story around them. Like if you describe a village and you give like 2 or 3 NPCs and immediately they go off in 2 different directions to go talk to 2 of these NPCs that seemed interesting, then you're like, okay, my players like a little bit more role playing. They like a little bit more talking to people, and that's fine. But if your players are like, are there any enemies around? I want to make a perception check to see if there's anybody waiting in an ambush. Then you're like, okay, well, obviously they're itching for a fight, and that's okay. Typically, because our games are rather short compared to what I usually am used to. Typically, I like to throw at least 1 combat into a game, even if it's just a short one. I want to try and give both aspects of it, because I don't like running a game without combat. I feel like you're missing a big part of what D&D is, because obviously most of the time you're choosing your abilities and everything based on combat rather than based on role play. So I try to add a little bit in. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you just end up having a single session where it's a big council meeting and you have to sit through a Phantom Menace episode every now and then and reward XP based on roleplay instead.
Sure. Yeah, the dang Trade Federation.
Why do I get the feeling that Preston would roleplay Jar Jar Binks in a game?
Oh gosh, yeah, 100%. No, that makes sense.
I want to say hi to you.
Oh no! Stop it! Knock it off.
Is there a way to give negative inspiration?
You guys are all millennials. You're supposed to be fans of the prequels. I thought it was I thought it was Gen Xers who were like, prequels suck.
I like all Star Wars. I just hate Jar Jar Binks.
Okay, fair.
Yeah. He's the Prime Sith Lord, so.
What do
Yeah.
you guys think? So Preston, if I can put you on the spot a little bit here, I know that you DM a game currently with many players, one of whom is your wife. We can cut that out if you want to. But I know that she, from stories that you've told us, loves to try to like. She's very peace oriented, and she's always trying to like resolve every conflict without a fight. And when you've told me stories like that, I always think like, I would be so frustrated with that in my game, like because like I don't just like combat, but maybe I'm 60-40, you know what I mean? Like combat, I enjoy that aspect of the game. As I love roleplay too. But anyway, yeah, I'd be like, like no, I really wanted to fight those guys, you know?
So yeah, she for a long time she would kind of have that. Her character obviously has progressed and has changed and has become more of a bring about peace by the way of the sword type of character. But early on in the very beginning, and Corey was a part of that particular part of the arc, she was very much like she's, I believe it was Dianrect, if I'm saying the name right, was the god that she chose, which is a goddess of like healing and medicine. She was
a paladin,
like,
right?
And she's a paladin, and she would go in and she would it would be this whole thing, like the hobgoblins would roll in and she would cast calm emotions on the whole group. And I'm like, okay, they all fail. All right, what do you want to say? Like, okay, they're hobgoblins, they're sentient, they're willing to talk, like they're very martial, but you've taken that bloodlust down a notch, but what are you gonna say? And so then I give her the opportunity to say it, and of course because she has that charisma thing, then it would bump up. But what I've found, at least from curbing that, because I had other players too, they were very much just like, does it move? Does it breathe? Let's kill it. Like, and so it brought a kind of an interesting dynamic where she would calm the emotions, she'd begin to talk to him, and then he would hack their toes off, and then the combat would resume, and it would, things like that would happen, and it led for some pretty comical things. But I think what it was interesting for me as a DM, while it was very uncomfortable, it was something that helped me to grow, I feel like, because then I was thinking more about, okay, what are the intentions of this goblin camp, or what are the intentions of this org? Instead of just reading on the page, okay, the goblins attack, why do they attack?
Suddenly your NPCs have to become a little more interesting.
You have to give a little bit more depth to it, and so I found that was kind of an interesting
thing. Or just go with undead.
Let the players, I feel like you got to let the players be able to have those conflicts, because if I just stepped in and said, okay, it didn't work, we're moving on, whatever, I think that her as a player would probably not enjoy playing that character as much, whereas letting her move into that, and like Roland's with one of Corey's characters, talking to her and like that character journey and giving that opportunity, if I shut that down as a DM, then there wouldn't have been those opportunities. So you have to kind of like toe that line of stepping in when necessary, but also letting the players kind of weave their own.
I like that, because I can imagine that for your wife in that situation, like I would have to assume, would get frustrated when she's like trying to resolve a situation peacefully, and one of the murder hobos comes in and hacks somebody's toes off, and then everything, all the everything that she'd been doing is sort of thrown out the window. Like I can imagine that sort of leading to conflict between the players. Well, and I guess definitely between the characters, and maybe even between the players, right? If one person is always sort of trying to undermine what somebody else is doing, right?
It'll grate on you, whether even no matter how much you say, okay, well, that's just my character doing that, eventually there has to be an inciting point for either the characters or the players to be able to say, hey, look, like, this is wrong. So like for her, for instance, one of those growing moments was I believe it was something, you'd saved one of the hobgoblins. She had actually convinced him to change his ways, and he left. And when he went back to camp, they hung him because he was essentially a turncoat, essentially a deserter. And so they hung him. And so when they approached the castle, she found that corpse. And immediately after dispatching the others in the area, one of them cut down the corpse and began to pull his teeth out, because he had gold teeth or whatever, like I had in the description I had in there. He started pulling the teeth out and desecrating the corpse and stuff. And so for her, that was like this is the last straw. And so she like stormed off into the thing. So they go in to try and fight, and she's just out there in the woods. She's like, nope, I'm out there, it's fine. Like,
Yeah,
Don't
it
worry
was
about
a great moment, and there was a lot of really good stuff that came of that too.
Yeah,
Nice.
just let your characters. I think just let it flow, and
Which means
don't
combat and RP can go together. What?
my favorite kind of
Nonsense.
combat.
That's the only kind of combat. Let's be honest. For you,
It's true.
Preston.
It's true. It's 100%.
Yeah.
Like, hey, all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stab him with the sword. And it's like, no, I will draw my sword and I will raise it into the air.
I could shoot this thing with
Natural
my
one,
crossbow
and then I
for
stab myself.
50 damage, but instead I will hurl insults at them, and
Exactly.
you know,
Polymorph into a T-Rex.
yeah. Or take our pet unicorn and polymorph it into a T-Rex and
Corey,
throw it
how
into
tall
the
is this
fight.
room? And would you say a hippopotamus would fit?
That question became one of the banes of my existence. Just when I heard that, I was just like,
Big is
shenanigan time.
Yep, here we go. All right, what do you think, Mr. Rogers? Anything that you'd add there as far as yeah.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the session length as well. If you're playing like our sessions are usually 2.5 hours, and that's
Maybe
enough.
3 if we're lucky.
Yeah, if we're lucky, we'll get 3, and so that's probably enough for one combat, I think, because combat just takes so long in the game. If you're playing maybe like a 4 or 5 hour session, maybe you can get 2 combats, 3 combats in there, but
And it entirely depends on the combat too.
exactly. If it's, just something that you can easily dispatch, whatever. But I also think an encounter doesn't necessarily need to be a combat encounter to be rewarding. There could be RP encounters, there can be puzzles, there can be, I don't know, you're lost in the woods and you don't know how to get from A to B type encounters, or, there's a 5,000 foot bridge and a 200 foot section is missing. How are you getting across? Like those kind of things.
Right.
So your encounters don't always have to be combat oriented.
Sure.
To be entertaining and be engaging, but
so mix it up as far as the encounters that you bring in. I mean, maybe we should say there's combat, there's RP, and then there are other non-combat encounters that still require maybe like the casting of spells, skill checks, potential danger. You might fall, take damage. You might, you know what I mean?
The big bad appears and then leaves.
Right. Yeah. I think that's definitely an important thing. Something, Corey, that you had mentioned that I wanted to get back to. I appreciate that I guess approach. I think especially for people who combat is maybe their favorite part of the game, right? It can be a little frustrating to go, one session, okay, 2 sessions, 3 sessions. Like if you don't have a fight, it can get a little bit like, oh, like I'm chomping at the bit here. Like I want to, flex my characters' muscles, as it were, and do things. And so I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb for most parties, probably, is to try and have, if you can, at least one combat encounter per session. Unless, of course, you have a party who just doesn't really care that much about combat and just is there for the role play, right?
Yeah,
the Scooby-Doo squad.
Yep. and again, you can pick them out of a room really easily.
Sure.
Because they're the ones that are talking. They're the ones that are really trying to push the lore behind everything and going on shopping trips just because they want to see what items are available and talk to the shopkeep because he's kooky or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you leave it too long and there is a murder hobo in your party, not to use that as a derogatory term, murder hobos are fine. But
actual
if there is
hobos,
one,
maybe not, but
yeah, not actual ones. But if there is one and it's been 3 sessions without a combat, they're going to be making moves with their character that they normally wouldn't. If they're a character that's normally peaceful or normally just I won't throw the first punch, they might lean more towards throwing that first punch and more towards the chaotic thing because they'll start looking for the fight.
Yeah. Let me ask this maybe more specifically. Do you guys have any additional tips or advice that you haven't mentioned so far about sort of pleasing your table if you have sort of 2 extremes, right, of people who just want to fight all the time and people who don't really want to fight ever? Like Preston, you gave a great example of sort of letting them find ways to resolve it in game amongst themselves. Any ideas for, helping move that along, especially if they don't seem to be, finding common ground or finding a resolution?
I don't know about you guys, but for me, I think that creating opportunities as a DM, like not railroading, but like, for instance, whenever there was a long drawn out combat between, and I start seeing that a character is itching for a fight, and they have these new spells that they just got, but they can't use them yet.
Yeah.
I'll drop things in there like, hey, you're walking down the street and some guy tries to cut purse, tries to steal your stuff. Or maybe you can
fireball.
Fireball in the middle of the city square. Yes,
all the commoners are dead. That's okay, because the cleric just got their revivify, and they've been itching to use that too. So
exactly.
Or if let's say you're campaigning and the whole party is just really just heavily going down that murder hobo, and they've killed half the townspeople or something, and there's one person that's like wanting to do the opposite. Maybe the city guard starts standing in, and you have a jailer scene where they have to talk their way out of legal situation.
That's when the barkeep turns out to be a retired adventurer, and you've got more of a fight on your hands.
Yeah. I'm a level 20 barbarian. Bring it.
Exactly. Yeah, just make sure there's consequences, I think, to both styles of the game. And if you are doing too much combat, then the prison or the retired guy or whatever.
Yeah.
And if it's too much role play, well, maybe you didn't stop something from happening that you should have, and now an entire village got raided by orcs because you didn't step in.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's ways to kind of not necessarily like punish, but kind of be like, try and steer the balance.
Yeah.
Your choices have exactly.
I would also say that speaking specifically with a situation where somebody tries to stop combat all the time by talking with people and being charismatic enough that it would be successful, either making your enemies even more cunning than them and getting into a whole like, oh yeah, sure, we'll stop, and then getting real close and then attacking again, sneak attacking, or you could have a situation, like I said earlier, where suddenly the monsters that you're fighting start shifting to be more mindless creatures, right? Like a zombie or any sort of like mindless undead. They're just going to try and lash out at the living, or an aberration is going to want to just destroy anything because it thinks it's not beautiful, or whatever an aberration's way is.
Okay. No, I like that. Well, all right. Let me do one final question that's not exactly on the same topic, but related. And some of the things that you guys have said have kind of got my brain turning a little bit here, and also thinking about a question that I asked of my viewers in my video this week on the Rogue Tank, which is number of combat encounters, I should say, per day. What do you guys think is kind of the right amount? In the DMG, if I'm not mistaken, Wizards of the Coast recommends having something like 6 to 8 encounters per long rest.
Right? Of easy or medium difficulty.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that makes a difference, because we never have those. Ours are always deadly or beyond.
I do have a tendency to want to make combat harder because it makes it more fun, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't complain about difficult combat encounters. But the question sort of came up for me as I was talking in my episode this week of like, how many encounters is typical in a day? Because it's difficult when creating a character for me to kind of go, okay, well, you've got things that renew on a short rest. You've got things that renew on a long rest. What can I consider sustainable, especially if they don't renew until a long rest? Sorry. How often are you going to be able to use these things in a given day? Obviously, that just is going to depend on your table, on your DM, how many encounters. But I was like, how many encounters are typical for you guys? Let me know in the comments. And most of the comments have been like, yeah, like three or 4, 2 to 4 seems to be pretty common for most tables, which is what I sort of assumed. Yep. It was like, for us, it seems to be, it depends on the day, sometimes 1. Right. But, maybe 1 or 2 short rest, 1 or 2 long rest seems to be fairly typical for us.
Yeah.
And it seems to be that way for most tables. So why is it that Wizards is saying, have 6 to 8 encounters? Are they just talking about combat? Are they talking about can we consider other things as encounters? Are they considering other things as encounters, like Mr. Rogers kind of mentioned? What are your guys' thoughts?
I would think so. I don't know, 6 to 8 combat encounters seems like a lot.
Right.
And if it's a 5-hour session, all you would be doing is combat the entire time.
If you were trying to get through a whole day.
Yeah. So doing 6 to 8, you wouldn't even have time to role play. Okay, now you just have to be like, you're at this location. Now you're at this location and there's bad guys. Now you're here and there's more bad guys. Like, it would just be so weird.
Yeah.
So I think I have to imagine they just mean encounters, not combat encounters.
Something that may require the expenditure of a resource.
Right.
How about that?
So the DMG specifically does reference combat encounters actually for 6 to 8. However,
that seems high.
Once again, they're easy or medium combat encounters, and it says the higher difficulty ones reduce the number of encounters that your party can handle within a day. And it's not so much that this is how many they should have, as it is this is how many that they can deal with at each level. And I think one of the things is, because I only do like one combat encounter a night with you guys, I want to make it feel epic and awesome. And so I do a hard or a difficult or a deadly encounter, and those take a lot longer, because if it was an easy encounter, it might be like 3 bandits show up to try and rob you, and you take them out in 5 minutes or whatever it is, kind of thing. And that's considered an easy encounter. So I may be skewing your guys' perception of what an encounter is like with how I usually operate them. But at the same time, it does feel like a lot. It does feel like a lot of encounters to go through.
I would say that Preston and Mr. Rogers, in my experience playing with you guys, the combat encounters feel similar, as far as like, it's rare that we'll like have to fight 3 bandits. It's always like some big set piece, right? Where there's just like all these
drive the story.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining at all. Like, I think it's awesome. Sure, it might be fun once in a while to be like, 2 bandits try to attack you, and you're like, bandits, I'm awesome,
Yeah.
But yeah, the big events are always fun. I don't know.
Yeah, I think too, it feels like, at least in my experience, that we've kind of been lucky with the way the times that our session ends has been like the end of the character day as well. And so it feels natural, but sometimes that's not the case. You might have only gone 2 hours in game in your 2-hour session. Right. So when you start next time, you're still in that same day.
It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon instead of 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Exactly. So we've been kind of fortunate, I guess, that ours tend to line up with our sessions.
Yeah.
We tend to get through a day per session, or it feels like that's pretty common. But
I wonder if that isn't intentional on your guys' part, frankly, to kind of
it makes the storytelling a little easier. I think.
Yeah.
And I do it partially because the question that I hate at the beginning of a session where we were in the middle of something and we just finished up a combat and it's still the same day is, wait, why am I missing this HP here? Why do I not have this spell slot? I thought I used this, but apparently I didn't.
Like notes. It's like I have no idea why you're missing that.
Everybody's asking me these questions, and me as a GM, it's like, I don't keep track of your character. That's like the one thing that I don't keep track of. So it's easier for me to say, all right, so you guys have fought your big bad for the day. Go ahead and you can go back to the inn and take a long rest, because then I can be like, hit it fresh tomorrow. And that's another reason why I do deadly encounters, and I make them even more deadly than it probably is necessary. Because I do love the whole, like, you guys are fully powered and you come up against this amazing force that is comparable to you at full strength, like it's
absolutely multi-stage encounters too. Those are probably the things that I really love, is the whole something bleeds and it's like, oh, that was really easy, and then it slides into something worse, and then it gets a little bit worse, and then you can either end on a cliffhanger or so to me that would be like for instance, some of those encounters, I'll consider those, instead of one just big long encounter, that's actually 3 encounters, but you've gone from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. And I wonder if Wizards is kind of on the same page.
They actually have a multi-part encounter section just below that in the DMG that talks about multi-parts should each be considered their own encounter. And then you want to, there's also like an idea of, you want to make sure that multi-part encounters don't exceed more than a third of the total XP budget for your monsters each day. Oh, or else it'll be too hard because multi-part encounters are supposed to be going from one encounter to the next in waves and not being able to take a short rest or a long rest.
You're
not being
sieging
able
the
to recover.
castle, or you've gone into the Tomb of Annihilation, or something.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, see, that just makes me really excited to do like a long dungeon crawl that takes like 4 in-game days of just being in that dungeon. Like that just sounds so fun.
Those can be fun too, right? They can be epic. It definitely can be a little bit disorienting for the player when you sit down and kind of go, okay, let's see what happened last time, and like how many hit points do I have, and which spell slots did I use?
The one thing that I do think is positive to that though is that it pulls away the curtain a little bit from that, hey, we're gods of this realm and like we can do anything and it's fine, and makes them be like, oh, like I just burnt like 3 fireballs on these kobolds and now we're fighting drakes, or now we're fighting basilisks, or now we're fighting, and so it gives that fear of like, oh, okay, well I don't just want to burn everything on this first encounter, I need to be economical, which is something we're going to probably have a pretty rough experience with the 10K.
I have noticed that about the group is I think the way that I have done combats with the group has kind of swayed you guys to be like, oh yeah, I can drop a spell slot really easily and have it be okay because we can just take a short rest or a long rest when we need to. And I that might be shifting a little bit because I do like the idea of you guys being like, I have to be sure that I'm saving things for when I need them rather than just on every single rabbit that I see.
Right. Yeah. Every single rabbit. Okay, well, this has actually got me really interested in wanting to talk more about how to actually balance the combat encounters themselves, and that might be our topic for next week.
That's going to be
about
that'll be post 10K, and I can talk about all the things that I did wrong.
Well, I killed everybody in the first round, so
I don't know. Maybe after that, we all need to go back and review the conflict video that we did previously.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because everybody died.
Well, okay. Well, that's it for the week. Thanks everybody for watching. Appreciate it. Thanks to my DMs as always for joining us and having an engaging and interesting conversation. So yeah, tune in next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all of the things that I'm supposed to say.
Do the things.
Do
the things.
And love you guys, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
See ya.